I've never yelled at you before, Al, but I'm about to now.
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and maniacs offering to double your pension. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at the house that Jack built. This 2018 psychological horror follows a sociopathic serial killer and wannabe architect named Jack, who spent over a decade committing elaborately gruesome murders in the 70s and 80s. Jack finds himself in a strange place with a stranger named Verge, with whom he recounts 5 examples of his brutality through the years. He views every murder as a piece of art and attempts to explain to Verge the reasoning behind his life's work. The house that Jack built was created by Danish writer and director Lars von Trier, who has brought us films like Melancholia, Antichrist, Nymphomaniac, Dogville, and Dancer in the Dark. His films range from drama to romance to horror, but they are generally known for their existential, religious, and political themes, explorations of mental illness, and graphic violence and sexuality. I genuinely need to warn y'all, his movies are fucked up and this one is no exception. This is on the more extreme side of horror films I've covered on the channel, and it's also on the more artistic side as well. Von Trier has a terrifying, very distinct way that he sees the world and uses filmmaking as a way to work through his own beliefs and hardships. Quite frankly, I fluctuate between loving and hating his films, but at the very least I can respect his unique way of doing things. That being said, Von Trier has proven to be a piece of shit on multiple occasions, with him making jokes about being a Nazi, working closely with widely accused sexual predators and being accused of sexual harassment himself, and literally killing a live donkey for one of his films. But the dude has won a fuck ton of awards even very recently, and he is frequently collaborating with a ton of really talented people, so my best guess is he isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Von Trier actually envisioned the house that Jack built as a TV series originally, for which he studied a whole bunch of serial killers to base his protagonist on. He also looked at the various ways that hell has been depicted and written about, utilizing Dante's Inferno as the structure for Jack to share his memories. The film stars Matt Dillon from The Outsiders and Wild Things as Jack, aka Mr. Sophisticated, Bruno Ganz from Wings of Desire and Nosferatu the Vampire as Verge, Uma Thurman from Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill as Lady One, Siobhan Hogan from Funny Games and We Need to Talk About Kevin as Lady 2, Sophie Grabol from Flickering Lights and Night Watch as Lady 3, Riley Keough from Mad Max Fury Road and Under the Silver Lake as Jacqueline, aka Simple, and Jeremy Davies from Helter Skelter and Solaris as Al the gun store owner. Cinematography was handled by frequent Von Trier collaborator Manuel Alberto Claro, who has also shot Melancholia, Nymphomaniac, and a Mexican horror movie I recently covered called The Untamed. The film is surprisingly not shot in the Pacific Northwest or even in America, with locations including Denmark, Sweden, Italy, and England. Could have fooled me. The film's score and sound design was created by composer Victor Reyes of Buried and Red Lights, and the grand task of editing this monster was tackled by Jacob Skolzinger of The Square and Force Majeure. The house that Jack built premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, where it had 100 people walk out, but also received a 10-minute standing ovation. It ended up grossing $5 million at the box office, only half of its original budget, but I'm sure it's made it up through streaming. As Von Trier films usually do, it ended up polarizing critics and general audiences alike. Reviews have ranged from calling it a masterpiece all the way to a masturbatory piece of shit. But even those who hated the film were able to appreciate Dillon's diverse performance, Claro's gorgeous cinematography, and Von Trier's uncompromising approach. It currently has a 60 and 64% on Rotten Tomatoes, and its 3.6 on Letterboxd is a bit more favorable. I've seen the house that Jack built a few times now, and I have a lot of thoughts I'm excited to share after the breakdown. Thank you so much to my patron Victor from the Horror Movie Syllabus for requesting this movie for me to review. I think this should be a hell of a breakdown. And if you haven't already, be sure to go and check out Victor's channel, The Horror Movie Syllabus, here on YouTube. He did an episode on extreme horror films that I literally watched to research for talking about Von Trier. But with all of that said, it's probably time we get started. I hope y'all like architecture and dead kids, because we're watching the house that Jack built. The movie opens in darkness as our protagonist Jack asks an entity named Verge if he can speak during their journey together, and the latter explains that many feel compelled to confess and he is welcome to do so as well. Jack opts to share 5 random incidents, aka murders, that he committed over the past 12 years. These incidents, while being random, are in chronological order, so we start with him being a real novice at being a serial killer all the way to being really fucking good at it. The first incident, which also might be Jack's first kill ever, hard to say, practically fell into his lap as he encountered a woman with a flat and a broken jack. Get it? He reluctantly gives the woman a lift over to a blacksmith named Sunny, and on the way over she jokes that she may have gotten into the van of a serial killer. She declares that if that were the case she would bash him over the head with the jack. They arrive at Sunny's and Jack prepares to depart, but the pushy woman talks him into driving her back as well. On the way back she says there is no way he can kill her now since Sunny has seen them together. The jack breaks again though, and Jack calls it quits, stating he has an appointment to go to. She practically demands that he drop her off at Sunny's though, and she takes back what she said about him looking like a serial killer.
You don't have the disposition for that sort of thing. You're way too much of a wimp to murder anyone.
Jack proceeds to murder her with her own jack. Verge is unimpressed by this standard murder as he has bore witness to a countless amount of them. We also get a taste of this film's documentary, almost slideshow way of transitioning as Jack shares his appreciation for the classical pianist Glenn Gould. Verge asks if he is supposed to consider this woman's murder a piece of art, and Jack prattles on about how cathedrals often hide their most beautiful works where only God, or the great architect, can view it. He says that the Gothic cathedrals are the most iconic and functional, as the invention of pointed arches allowed them to grow to new heights while conserving material. Jack believes every material has a will of its own, and if you can follow that will, the result will be exquisite. Verge thinks this discussion would only interest an engineer, which it turns out Jack is. His mother deemed it as a financially viable option, but his real dream was always to be an architect. Jack received a large inheritance when his mother died, so he bought a plot of land with the goal of designing and building his own home. Verge wonders if Jack suffers from a bit of OCD, and the killer confirms he has some compulsions to leave a room neat and tidy. This was increasingly difficult to maintain in the walk-in freezer that he kept his victims in. This freezer also features a mysterious Chekhov's gun, a door that Jack was never able to open. Verge asks if he had many interactions with the police during his time, but Jack says he maintained a great deal of luck over the years. The spot he hid the woman's car just happened to be over the county line, so he was never even questioned. Up next is incident number 2, which shows a much more deliberate Jack as he follows a woman home.
Hi.
Hi. Who are you?
Police.
He knocks on the door impersonating a police officer with a very vague concern that some crime might happen at her local supermarket. She asks to see a badge, and the dumbass starts bullshitting about how his badge is at the silversmith getting shined. She refuses to let him in, and he congratulates her, now saying this was some kind of safety exercise. He notices a memorial to her railroad working husband and convinces her that he can help increase her pension, which is finally his golden ticket inside. As soon as he gets inside, he goes on a tirade about how humiliating it is going door to door, and once her back is turned, he strikes. He strangles the woman nearly to death, but the poor thing survives and struggles to breathe through her broken windpipe. The maniac crumbles what I think is a donut into a cup of tea and pours it into her mouth in an attempt to finish her off, but when that fails, he resorts to strangling her again. That finally gets the job done, but he stabs her in the heart just to be sure. He takes some curated photos of his activities and loads the woman into his van, but the OCD in him demands that he clean up every inch of the home. He checks every nook and cranny for evidence multiple times, meaning he is still on the premises when a police officer shows up. Even then, he feels compelled to check for blood, but when the officer gets distracted by something, it gives Jack the opportunity to hide the body in the nearby bushes. Turns out there was a break-in down the street, so this officer thinks Jack is just a potential witness who is simply visiting his friend Claire. Jack refuses to take this easy out and decides to tell the officer that Claire has been missing for a few hours. The officer goes inside to take a look, and Jack sneaks in behind him to make sure there is no more blood. He starts micromanaging the officer on how to investigate, successfully getting himself kicked out. He ties Claire's corpse to the back of the van and skirts on out of there, blissfully unaware he is leaving a mile-long skid mark back to the freezer. The lucky bastard is blessed with an intense rain that washed away all the blood though. This moment legitimized the importance of his murders to Jack, making him believe he had divine protection. Verge asks if he realizes what a psychopath he is, and Jack says he is well aware. He went to great lengths to communicate casually and fake feeling empathy. He tells Verge that as a boy he feared playing with the other kids, opting to hide in the nearby reeds. Verge argues that the open path of broken reeds left behind worked as an open invitation to follow him, and he asks if he was a little upset that the rain washed away his tracks. Jack was mostly just amazed, as he has gone his entire life inexplicably avoiding punishment. As a boy, he loved to watch the farmers mowing the meadows with their scythes, believing the land was most conscious when in unison with their breath. Then, little Jack cuts the foot off a duckling, but don't worry, I'm not showing y'all that. For some reason, this isn't considered a separate incident, but during another flashback, he strangles this lady to death. I guess it's related, as after a few more murders, his OCD began to diminish, and he began to take greater risks. He wasn't happy with his photos of this woman and wanted to bring her back to the crime scene, but on the way, he got the sudden urge to run over this woman. He describes this moment as a sort of blood frenzy, like he's an ermine in a henhouse. Jack then references the poems of William Blake, describing the artist as the savage tiger and the art itself as the innocent lamb. He believes it is an honor for the lamb, as it will live forever as art. So Jack returned to the crime scene with both bodies, feeling liberated in the risks he was taking. He mailed one of his new photos to the local paper, signing it as Mr. Sophistication. But what Jack grew to love most about his photos were the negatives. He feels the negative can show the true demonic quality of light. Verge asks if he wants to repent for his sins like many of the others he's traveled with, but he repents nothing. He does have another analogy for his bloodlust, describing the moments he kills as the shadow under a lamppost. At this moment, it is the most true and dense, but as time passes, both pleasure and pain, which are the shadows cast by the lamps ahead of him and behind him, begin to grow. Eventually, the pain outweighs the pleasure. When it finally becomes too much, it means he will kill again. Verge asks if he ever wanted a family of his own, but the closest Jack ever got to it was simply using the concept of family as inspiration for his next murders. The third incident is all about hunting. Somehow Jack has wriggled his way into the lives of this single mother and her two young sons. The older son, Georgie, is pumped to learn how to shoot these powerful guns, but the younger one, simply known as Grumpy, wants to go home. Jack starts bullshitting about how distasteful hunting is, describing the act of deciding what lives and what dies as culling. He teaches George how to shoot the rifle, but the young lad hits the target in the hindquarters.
Congratulations, young Georgie. You hit the animal.
Traditionally, a hunter would have a Schweiss dog, which is trained to follow a wounded animal's blood trail. He explains to Verge that when hunting a group of deer, it's best to shoot the young ones first, as the mother can survive without them, but not vice versa. So yeah, Jack starts hunting this mother and her children from the tower. First to go down is Grumpy when he makes a run for it, followed by George with a headshot. He tortures the poor woman by having the destroyed family sit down at the picnic she set up, demanding she feed George some pie. He makes her pick her favorite number, which happens to be 12, so she gets a 12-second head start before he shoots her as well. He follows her blood trail over to a nearby ditch, finishing the dying woman with a shot through the back. He creates a European trophy parade out of the family and a bunch of crows that he culled. Verge refuses to acknowledge the artistry of these themed killings, and Jack explains that some natural disasters made him realize that cinder blocks were the wrong materials for his Barbie dream house. Both his notoriety as a serial killer and the foundation of his new home were growing, but back in the present, Jack isn't feeling so good. Verge explains that the air becomes acidic at this depth. Jack really wanted to do something special with Grumpy's corpse, manipulating him before freezing to have him permanently placed in this horrifying position. Verge asks if this was a pathetic attempt at feeling love, but Jack argues he had a romantic partner once. The fourth incident involves a woman he claims to have had truly strong feelings for, despite the fact he tricked her into believing he needed a crutch to walk. They're currently having some sort of lover's quarrel, so Jack cheers her up by calling her from the next room over. He convinces her that he isn't planning on leaving her, and after a few minutes of being nice, he proceeds to be an absolute dick again. Her name is Jacqueline Simple, but he prefers to call her Simple in order to belittle and anger her. He actually confesses to being a serial killer here, bragging that he has killed 60 people. He says that number will soon be updated to 61 though, and he uses a magic marker to draw a perimeter around her boobs. Jacqueline obviously gets a bad feeling and rushes outside and tries to explain this to a cop, but when Jack pretends to drunkenly apologize for being a shitty boyfriend, he sends them both back inside. He begs and pleads for her forgiveness, and they head back upstairs, and he pretends to pass out as she tries to call up a dealer. She realizes her phone line has been cut and quietly tries to leave, but Jack has already taken her keys. She realizes he hasn't been using his crutch and that he is the Mr. Sophistication. He invites her to scream and even joins in on it.
Help! Yes! Help! There's a murderer in the building!
But they both come to realize that nobody is coming to help her. He gags her and ties her up with a phone cord and starts venting to her about how hard it is being a man. Everywhere he goes, he's seen as the bad guy. He's guilty until proven innocent. And he proceeds to cut off Jacqueline's breasts and places one of them on the cop's windshield. Verge asks why the women he kills are so remarkably stupid and why he doesn't talk about any of the men he has killed. He believes Jack feels superior to women, but Jack says they are just easier to work with. The two have a back and forth where they argue the value of language and religion, with Jack arguing that God has denied the tiger within us all, turning humanity into a horde of slaves. Jack believes that putrefaction, the rotting of a body, is neither good nor evil. He believes the human body's ultimate goal doesn't take place during life, but after. He explains that there are several ways to extract the sweetness of grapes for the perfect wine. There is freezing, dehydration, and Jack's favorite, a fungus called the noble rot. These three forms of decomposition give the grape a higher purpose, and he feels the same way about people. Verge argues that he is simply describing decomposition, and real art needs love to be created. Jack demolished his in-progress house several more times because he wasn't happy with it, but he can't argue that those moments of destruction were art. Warning, this next segment talks about Nazism and the Holocaust and actually shows film documentation of starving and executed Jewish prisoners. I won't be showing these images here, but it definitely caught me off guard during my first watch. Jack references a Nazi architect named Albert Speer who studied Roman ruins in an attempt to create German buildings designed to look ancient in a much shorter time. While Jack isn't religious, he does appreciate some good iconography. He loves the German dive bomber known as the Stuka, which were attached with sirens specifically to terrify those below. He whines about how the world refuses to acknowledge the icon makers, aka the dictators, war criminals, murderers, and other awful humans who have plagued this earth. Verge finally admits that Jack is the single most vile person that has ever graced his presence, and has a more hopeful example of iconography involved in the Holocaust. In the middle of a concentration camp stood a tree that poet Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who penned things like Faust and Prometheus, sat beneath during his time. Even in the midst of the greatest crime against humanity, symbols of art and love couldn't be completely eradicated. Now Von Trier just shows us a highlight reel of fucked up shit from his own films while Jack rambles about heaven and hell and the body and soul. Oh yeah, he also used Simple's other breast as a wallet, in case you were wondering. Okay, we finally made it to the 5th incident, which has happened just very recently. Jack has captured a group of men and kept them alive inside his freezer with the intent of replicating a Nazi execution trick. Basically, he wants to line their heads up and kill them with a single full metal jacket bullet. Fortunately, one of the men he kidnapped is in the army and notifies Jack that the bullets he has on hand aren't full metal jackets, so he has to make a run to his local ammunition store. He yells at Al the clerk and demands a correctly labeled box, but the terrified man asks if he has a receipt. Jack asks for just one bullet, which further concerns Al, but the killer ultimately gets frustrated and leaves. Al contacts the authorities, and Jack's reckless driving has him crash into a ditch. He's close enough to jog over to his buddy SP's house, but the Manson-looking fella tells Jack that the police have been looking for him. That is why Al was so scared earlier, as he's aware Jack is not using his bullets for wildlife. Unfortunately, the cops, SP, and Al simply think Jack committed an armed robbery, which he passionately denies, but SP has him sit down while he calls the cops. Jack tells SP he considers him his best friend, and after getting his guard down with some fond memories they've shared, he stabs the old-timer right through the jaw. Jack collects a single full metal jacket bullet and waits for the cops to arrive, and dons SP's red cloak to kill the responding officer. He steals the officer's car and returns to the freezer, leaving the siren on for all to hear. He loads up his rifle, but finds he is too close for the scope to focus. The OCD king wouldn't dare make an out-of-focus shot, and determines it is finally time to get inside that mysterious door. Officers begin to arrive as he sets up his shot, but it's in here that Jack meets his new buddy Verge. Apparently Verge has been waiting on Jack for some time now, but he hasn't noticed him until now. He asks Jack why he never got around to building his house, and the police chime in over megaphone to let Jack know he is surrounded. Verge suggests that he put his engineering skills to use with the materials he appreciates most, and the maniac gets to work. Jack finally constructs his perfect house, and even Verge is impressed with the quality. He invites Jack inside as the police start cutting their way in, and they descend into a hole before they can shoot him. Here we begin Jack's katabasis, aka the hero's journey to the underworld. It's here we return to their conversation at the beginning of the film, as all of Jack's stories have been told during their journey to hell. The two travel through icy seas, drop from cliffs, and traverse cramped caves during their travels, all of these being the levels of purgatory before they reach hell. Verge explains the buzzing Jack hears is the sound of millions of screams, and it will only get more intense as they get closer. Wouldn't be a Von Trier flick without some fucking slow motion water, now would it? The two continue descending through a few cool set pieces and some absolutely ridiculous set pieces. One location allows Jack to observe the Elysian Fields, a final resting place for the heroic and virtuous. This is the one and only moment we see Jack shed a genuine tear. Believe it or not, y'all, Jack is not going to the Elysian Fields. His final resting place looks a bit more like Moria than the Shire. Below is the deepest pit of hell, but Jack isn't actually going that far down. This bridge once functioned as a pathway out of hell and up to heaven, but that was before Verge's time. Jack asks if it's possible to climb the rocky wall over to the other side, but Verge has never seen anybody succeed. Jack opts to take his chance, and Verge leaves seeming a bit disappointed. Jack has a pretty good start across the wall, but the out-of-shape middle-aged man surprisingly hasn't kept up with his ninja warrior skills. Jack ultimately loses his footing, and the movie ends as he plummets down into the deepest pits of hell. And that's the house that Jack built. Man, I'm not even sure where to start. I will say that I rewatched the movie twice for this review, and I definitely got more out of it on the second rewatch. I think just being more familiar with the plot allowed me to pay more attention to the little details and the dark humor of the film. Given the content of what's going on here, it really is impressive how funny some of the segments are. Watching a still pretty green Jack try very poorly to get into Claire's house is actually hilarious, as are all of his OCD fixations after the murder takes place. Each segment has a fucking ton of really heavy-handed foreshadowing going on, which I think is both meant to be menacing and absurd. But that humor is also matched and often outmatched by the sheer brutality of the events that take place in between. The hunting kill in particular is very uncomfortable and hard to watch, especially with the foreshadowing all but declaring how these children are going to be murdered. But what sets the house that Jack built apart from many of the other very extremely violent horror movies you could watch, there is a real message behind all of the madness here. In fact, I would say Von Trier has more messages than he could possibly handle in here. Through this film, he is pondering his own life's work, which has run the gamut of praise and condemnation. Through the character of Jack, he is trying to communicate the value he finds in the extremity of his own films, while also poking fun at himself in the process. This point is made redundantly clear when he literally shows moments from his own previous works shortly after speaking on the iconography of architecture, weapon design, and genocide. I'm not saying Von Trier believes every fucked up thing Jack says. That character exists more as a terrifying extreme of what Von Trier is expressing. Von Trier is basically having an internal angel versus devil back and forth between Jack and Verge, during which he finds time for so many specifically weird left field ideas that only he can draw a connection between. The Schweißdog, the pointed arches, and the noble rot are just a few examples of weird specific practices Von Trier came across and found fascination in. There are so many moments where we abandon the flashbacks so Jack can provide a monologue on why he is doing something in a certain way, just to ensure that Verge can see how clever he is. Von Trier is highlighting his own need for attention and his own need to feel clever. He wants to be accepted as an artist, but he also wants to disturb and provoke his audience as well. He wants to revel in the gruesome things that fascinate him, but he's also expressing the disgust in the fact that those things do fascinate him. One murder at a time, Jack is paving his way to hell, and Von Trier is wondering if he is on a similar path of his own. But there is still a lot to chew on here outside of Von Trier's own personal dilemmas, as there are just so many intricate details and themes on display here. This film is really a character study on the mind of a serial killer, with Jack serving as an amalgamation of history's most notorious. From impersonating police, using a fake crutch, collecting news clippings, and keeping the bodies for macabre purposes, so many of Jack's little and large characteristics are based on real murderers like Ed Gein and Ted Bundy. Von Trier studied these killers and tried to understand the way their minds worked, and it provides Jack with a very enlightened but also inconsistent manifesto. While Jack admittedly gets a lot better as a serial killer through the years, he's never as great as his own ego would have you believe. One of my favorite details is that Jack views himself as an icon maker, a visionary, a true genius, but Verge chimes in time and time again to knock him down a few notches. He isn't some murderous mastermind, he got by thanks to luck and sheer police incompetence most of the time. He's no icon maker, he's no architect. He may have built a house by the end, but he never built a home. And that's a really important detail to me, as Verge argues that love is necessary to create a real piece of art. Jack never felt a shred of love, so even the most beautiful house he made would have been nothing but an empty shell just like him. In the end, all he could do was pile up his corpses into the icon of a house. But that house ended up being a doorway into his more permanent home as he gets a tour of hell itself. His journey through the Lake of Fire is derived from Inferno, the first part of Italian writer Dante Alighieri's 14th century epic poem Divine Comedy. Most people simply refer to it as Dante's Inferno, and it describes Dante's journey through hell, guided by the ancient Roman poet Virgil, aka Verge. In the poem, hell is depicted as 9 circles of torment located within the earth. It is the realm of those who have rejected spiritual values by yielding to more bestial appetites or violence, or by perverting their human intellect to fraud or malice against their own fellow men. That describes Jack to a fucking T. As an allegory, the Divine Comedy represents the journey of the soul toward God, with the Inferno describing the recognition and rejection of sin. The house that Jack built basically does the opposite, as Jack reveals more and more layers of his evil as we go on. One of my other favorite details is that, at least in my opinion, Verge is trying really fucking hard to help Jack, but the stupid bastard is too proud to acknowledge it. It's a lot to explain, but basically in Dante's Inferno, if you repent for your sins, even at the last possible moment, you can be permitted into purgatory. This would still involve punishment, but Jack could theoretically achieve enlightenment and enter heaven at some point if he's genuine. Verge literally asks him if he feels any remorse, and Jack declares that he repents nothing. Jack doesn't want to burn for all of eternity, but even in the face of hell, he is unable and unwilling to acknowledge that any of his evil acts were wrong. Matt Dillon turns in a great performance as Jack. He's very convincing as an emotionless killer, and as an emotionless killer trying to seem human. Bruno Gantz is also great. I love that he put up with stupid shit like crawling through caves for this. The actresses playing Jack's victims are all great as well, despite the fact that Jack's perception of them left them as pretty naive and unlikable. And as usual with Von Trier and Claro, the cinematography is outstanding. You get some really cool imagery during the epilogue. The mystery of where Jack is during the present in this film is an interesting way to frame the story, and it adds a lot of insight during a rewatch as well. So I've gone through the plot and delved into some of the background and meaning of the film, but I don't feel like I've given you my opinion on the film itself. I've spoken about a lot of aspects I really like, but there's also a lot in here that doesn't work for me. This applies to some segments more than others, but the film is kinda tedious, kinda slow, and kinda long. The intrigue of Jack and his ideology wavers from time to time in the film for me, as there's moments I'm super engaged and times I couldn't care less about his ramblings. I like that it's a mystery at first, but I really wish we got more of hell in this film. I know not everybody loves it, but to me that was the best part. And I'm not sure I'm sold on the slideshow aesthetic that is used for the interludes between the incidents. It's very visually jarring and puts more of an emphasis on listening to the words, which is great, but there are once again varying levels of interest I have while listening to Jack's TED Talk. I'm not really bothered or upset by the intense violence on screen, I guess I'm just desensitized, but it isn't a film I revisit very often, mostly because it is pretty unpleasant to watch. Of the Von Trier films I've seen, this has the same mixed bag of love, hate, technical quality, visual flair, egomania, and problematic themes. His films are hard for me to review, and they're really hard to place any kind of score, ranking, or numeric value on. I tackle his work more the way I do a conceptual art project in a gallery than I do most films. Von Trier obviously loves the attention and notoriety, but I believe he makes his films more for himself than any audience. The house that Jack built is the life and demise of an overconfident serial killer, an absurdly dark comedy, and an introspective look at the role and power of art and violence. I understand if you love this movie or if you hate it, if you find it too gruesome, too misogynist, too boring, or just too weird to enjoy. I understand if you think it's a masterpiece or a piece of trash. It's a Von Trier film which guarantees a wide variety of differing opinions. I wouldn't say I love The House That Jack Built, but I'd say it's worth seeing at least once for its unique framing of the story, its great character work, and its over-the-top ending. Well, that's about it. Thank you to my patron, the Horror Movie Syllabus, for requesting this for me to review. There are so many nuanced little details and themes here, I hope I scratched the surface of it a bit. And remember, if you'd like to request movies for me to review on the channel, head over to my Patreon. It's $5 a month and it really helps support the channel. But what did y'all think of The House That Jack Built, and of Von Trier in general? What's your favorite film by him? Do you love him, hate him? Let me know down below. And be sure to join me in 2 weeks as we check out Jason Goes to Hell. That should be one hell of a review. Thank you so much for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of The House That Jack Built. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should head over to my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks, y'all.